Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
And welcome to Teachers Talk Radio, and we've got a special show for you tonight. We're going to be talking about a new book out on Friday, Cabinet of Curiosity, Developing a Superpower. It's from Hachette Learning. This is what it looks like, and we're very lucky to be joined by the author, James Handscombe. He's Executive Principal of Harris Westminster and Harris Clapham Sixth Form. James, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And certainly, I want to get on to talking about the book, but there was something that struck me from the premise of the book, maybe from the structure of the book. And that was, I wanted to shine a light on it. It talks very much from a teaching point of view, from yourself delivering a series of lessons, and I wanted to ask that for some reason, and this might be my personal sort of experience. It surprised me as I've said, you're an executive principal. Does that keeping classroom practice talk to your personal philosophy to education, or is it the importance of the topic that we're going to be talking about that meant that you wanted to be delivering classroom lessons still?
I like being in the classroom. I think of myself as a teacher first and foremost, and I've taught every year, and I'm a maths teacher, and until very recently I was teaching maths every year. I don't do that anymore. I only do my Cabinet of Curiosity now. Once I had more than one school to look after, it was just impossible to be delivering a core subject. So my schools are sixth forms. The maths classes are A-level maths. They need somebody who can reliably be there every day, and that's the challenge of teaching as a head, even that you get taken away for meetings or emergencies that happen, and so you can't always be there. And in the book, there is a couple of points where I point out things that happen when I can't be there. So there are cover lessons in the impossible to cover course. But yeah, I love being in the classroom. I've spent my 10,000 hours learning how to teach, and I think it's really important. I don't have the life of a classroom teacher. My rhythms are not the same as somebody who's teaching 20-something hours a week. But I still have that connection. I still know what it's like to stand in front of a group. I had a group this afternoon, and we were doing Greek myths.
Oh, I love my son particularly as well, and I'll talk about my son a little bit later because he was sticking his nose into the book. My son, actually, the one that I'm talking about, is only 8, and he was actually really interested in finding out, and some of that from the cover, and some of it when I explained to him what it was. But he was already at that point. But I do think there's possibly, we'll talk more about curiosity and where it comes from and maybe where it goes at times as well. But I think certainly some of that passion, the way you talk about teaching, came very much through in the book, and that kind of it spoke very much that there was a lot of passion still there and a lot of energy and excitement in seeing these light bulbs go off for young people and seeing.
I mean, what you're seeing in your son there is exactly what we can kind of have in the classroom every day when it goes well, and it doesn't always go well. And I've said since I started in the Welsh Valleys in 1999 that on its best days, teaching is the best job in the world, and on its worst days, I mean, I'm sure it isn't quite the worst one, but it's pretty grim. So on those best days, I think it's really important to celebrate those light bulb moments, those students who go, you know what, actually, I don't think I understood this, or I didn't think I was interested, or whatever it is, but actually that's pretty cool. I like that.
Yes. I feel as reading the book and hearing you talk, I do feel a kind of kindred spirit for the things, and maybe that's in all teachers. Maybe that's the passion, and this book is kind of getting back to that kind of passion about seeing those things, seeing that excitement about topics and about things. I wanted to ask you the phrasing of it. Maybe this is something that I've missed before, but a cabinet of curiosity is not a phrase maybe that I'd come across before. Can you sort of give us a little insight into what does that mean? What is a cabinet of curiosity?
It's a long story, the Cabinet of Curiosity, in time. It dates back to the Renaissance, when it was a wonder chamber, and it wouldn't be quite a cabinet, it would be a room, and wealthy intellectuals would get stuff and put it in their room, and then when they were visited by other wealthy intellectuals, they would say, come and see my Cabinet of Curiosity, come and see my wonder room. And they'd go in, and there'd be interesting feathers and strange rocks and oils and a narwhal horn that they'd say, well, this is obviously a unicorn, or obviously we know it's not a unicorn, depending on who they were talking to. And it was the start of natural philosophy. So there's a phase that science went through of trying to understand the world by bringing it in and having it and looking at it and dropping it and seeing what happens. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And they were status symbols. So they would have people in and they would show off, and they were trickery. So you'd pretend to have a strange chimera of a creature. And so at some point in the future, somebody brings out a duck-billed platypus and everyone says, yes, you stitched that together just like the people with the Cabinet of Curiosity 200 years ago. And go, no, honestly, this is real, this one. But they were also people who had time and leisure, wanting to know more, wondering. The thing that inspired me is actually a painting by Domenico Remps from the 17th century, so quite a bit later than the first Cabinet of Curiosity, and it really is a cabinet that you might see in a National Trust property on the wall, full of weird stuff.
And is that the one on the book cover? Is that
no? That was original. It's a reimagining that was done for the book. The Domenico Remps. I mean, you can actually see it if you Google Cabinet of Curiosity. It comes up on the Wikipedia page. But it's a rather wonderful thing.
And I found it really interesting, and it is explained sort of in the start of the book as well. But I realised that it's something that I do, and also my son does. And I look at his bedside shelf, where he has a shelf on his bedside, and he almost already has his own Cabinet of Curiosity where he has picked up ammonites or geodes or things from different places, which he puts on the shelf. And I realized I do this as well. Maybe that's where he's got it from, of this kind of collecting things to think about or be thoughtful of and puzzle around. And I was wondering, is this curiosity and this collecting things that we're curious about, is that then part of human nature? Because I've realized I'm doing something like that without having heard of doing something like that.
I think that's a good question. I think it's a luxury. So I think that if your day is spent wondering where the next meal is coming from, can you find somewhere safe to sleep tonight, then you don't have the time and energy to collect ammonites. But I think that once you get there, then I wonder what that is. I wonder what else there is. I wonder what's over the next hill. I want to explore the world, and you see it in rodents, don't you? You have a little hamster or something. We had dagoos a few years ago, which are a South American gerbil, and they alternate between really interesting, absolutely terrified. And I think that really interesting. It's just what is there? What can I make sense of? What is there in the world? I think that is human.
So we talk a little bit there about being this cabinet of curiosity and being having curiosity, I guess would be the way of phrasing it. But the big question then is in a school sense, in the teaching of a series of lessons where we are looking to develop curiosity. What is your definition of curiosity? What is it that you're looking for to help the students discover or rediscover in themselves as curiosity?
I think it's lots of different things. And I think that one really big thing is that as we get older, we tend to make decisions about what we like, what we're interested in, and what we don't like, and what we're not interested in. And I think that closes down our horizons. And one of the things that I'm really keen on is that the students who come into my classroom should believe that whatever weird thing it is that Mr. Handscombe pulls out of his cabinet, it will be worth thinking. It would be worth 40 minutes of their time. It's interesting. I didn't know I was interested in Greek myths, but you know what? That was cool. I've got some more questions actually. What was Zeus actually on? Because that doesn't sound legal. And so I think that's one thing. The putting aside of no, I'm a STEM person or I'm an arts person, to just say no. Tell me more. This is all interesting, and I believe I can make sense of the world. I think it's a willingness to ask questions, to think about what you're told and expect it to make sense, and find it doesn't make sense, and say, hang on a minute. So one of my favorite chapters in the book, one of the ones that I think is perhaps exemplary of this, is the one on subatomic physics. And some of your listeners are going, oh, subatomic physics. No, subatomic physics is really cool and interested, and you should be interested. So when you're at school, when you're doing your GCSE physics, chemistry, either of those, both, they will teach you a model of an atom, and you'll have a picture of the nucleus that has protons that are positively charged and neutrons that are neutral. And around it, there are electrons whizzing around, and they're negative. And you're told that like charges repel and opposite charges attract. So the electrons are all repelling each other. And that's why they space themselves out in the way that they do. It's why chemistry works the way chemistry does. But they're attracted to the protons at the center of the nucleus, which is what stops them disappearing off into space. And you go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely fine with that. Until you stop for one cotton picking minute and say, hang on, what's happening in the nucleus? Because you have said that in the nucleus, there are these protons and there are these neutrons, and neutrons are neutral and protons are positive. So why aren't the positive charges repelling? Why doesn't every atom in the universe explode simultaneously? And there are two possibilities for this. One possibility, which is my own theory, has no scientific backing whatsoever, is that there is a tiny subatomic octopus sitting on the nucleus, holding everything together with its many legs. Everyone else, I mean, essentially what they're saying is that protons and neutrons are sticky somehow. They stick together. And you're going, what? They're made of glue? And they're not made of glue. That doesn't make any sense. And hang on, I don't think I really understand this. Like charges repel and opposite charges attract. We'll park that for now. What's actually going on in the... And you get a whole set of questions there that are going, hang on, what I was told doesn't quite make sense, but it should. Tell me what's going on. What am I missing? What is it? And there must be a force. And in the session, I go through how the force works and quarks and colours and how it all fits together and doesn't involve glue or indeed an octopus. But I think that's the thing I want. I want them to say that should make sense, and it doesn't.
And I think there's a part in there, and you do get onto this in the book, which scares me as a teacher, if I'm honest, that, you know, possibly there's two parts, I think. One is you are talking incredibly passionately about a subject that maybe isn't considered your specialism. Yeah. Okay, so there's an issue there, which in one way is exciting and thrilling, and you know, to be a maths teacher who's suddenly able to talk about Greek myths and suddenly able to talk about science must be incredibly freeing. But also the knowledge I guess, to be able to jump into that must be pretty hard, and not something that possibly I would be able to do, to jump into talk about that specific topic in that depth. If anything, I guess maybe I'd be one of those teachers, and this is maybe a part of where it gets onto another question of why we need the curiosity. I could deliver that, but I would be delivering content that was closing down questions to just enable the correct answer for a test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think we're used as teachers to the idea that you can operate one page in the textbook ahead of the students, that you can teach something that you don't know very well, but that when you do that, you are closing things down. You're saying, well, we're not going to ask that question because I don't know the answer. Yeah. We're going to stick with these questions that I do know the answer to. And that is very much against the model of the cabinet. And you talked about Greek myths. In my Greek myth session today, I had two students who were taking Latin A level that I hadn't really worked out before I decided to bite this one off. And they were correcting me all the way through. And so, okay, no, I didn't know that. Thank you. I didn't know that. And so I always start my cabinet of curiosity on home turf. I always start it with a lesson on maths and a bit of maths that I really know backwards, forwards, sideways, and inside out. And that means I can set the idiom of you should ask questions, because I'd be able to help you with your questions, be able to provide you with some answers. And also set out my stall as I do know some stuff. I've got game. So that when we get on to Greek myths and they're saying, actually, I don't think that is what Hesiod says. I'm going, okay, I'm not sure it is what Hesiod says. Should we both go away and look at it and come back next week? And they don't think I'm stupid, because they know I'm not stupid because I did the maths thing. Yeah. What they see is I'm really interested and I'm learning. I am curious about these things. And yeah, I've learned 40 minutes worth of content, more than you have. And here I am to share my 40 minutes worth of content. And we're going to come out with questions that neither of us know the answer to. And we're going to go away with questions from the lessons. And that's great. That's the point. That's why we're here, for questions.
And I want... Yeah, I wanted to get into, because there's a couple of parts you've mentioned already that kind of people might be listening and they might be falling towards, a term that we've maybe heard before around cultural capital, and this idea that perhaps there are things that are in some way valuable to be learned, like, Greek myths, or held up on a pedestal as that knowing them is in some way valuable, or knowing a list of the kings of England is in some way valuable, or that there is knowledge that needs to be taught. I should say, in the book, I checked in the first 4 pages in the introduction, and you do reference X-Files, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Shakespeare, Boris Johnson, and more in there. So there's clearly this kind of depth of knowing things about the world, but is the value in the Greek myths?
I think that cultural capital is best understood as knowledge that helps you communicate with other people. And so, I mean, on one level, almost anything, in fact, anything that could be cultural capital there. And yes, it could. It's a way of thinking about knowledge rather than a specific body of knowledge. But the reason that we think that these things are important, the reason that I think this breadth of knowledge is important, is so that you've got something to offer in conversation, so that somebody comes and they talk to you. I mean, the reason we talk about Greek myths is that it happened to be my lesson today. It doesn't appear in the book. It's not something that I am really highly focused on. It just happened to be today's lesson. But when it comes to a list, my list lesson also doesn't appear in the book, but it is the list of African countries in order of size, which I have off by memory because it's a good party trick. I am so much fun at parties. But that's kind of the point, because I'm not great at parties. I'm not great at small talk, but I do know the list of the African countries in order of size. And that gives me something to offer as a joke in a conversation. And someone else will tell me their thing that they know. And I'll be interested in their thing that they know, because I'm interested in all of the things. Please tell me some things and don't make me talk about celebrity traitors, which is also a form of cultural capital. People talk about celebrity traitors in order to communicate with each other. I just struggle with that because I don't know everything. I know some things. Perhaps I should be more interested, more curious about celebrity traitors. And so I don't think that there is a hierarchy. I think that there are different bodies of knowledge that enable you to access different people. So in the book, I talk about the 5 great mathematical jokes. And that is a way to communicate with mathematicians. They're jokes that are shared by mathematicians. If you get them, if you think they're funny, then you know some maths and we have something to talk about. And that's cultural capital if you're mixing with mathematicians. And it depends on who you're talking to. I've had cultural capital conversations with students about the best way of making jollof rice. And I don't have very much to offer, except that I know that there are 2 answers to this question, and the 2 students are never going to agree because they come from different jollof rice traditions. And that's cultural capital. I think that one of our jobs as schools is to provide students with cultural capital, with the access to conversations that they will not develop naturally. That's what lessons are for. And so I don't have a session on celebrity traitors because they can watch that themselves, and some of them do. I do have a session on subatomic physics because they're not going to see that themselves. I have to provide them with that cultural capital. And so they'll be able to make the fantastic joke that the inside of a proton is no more red, green, and blue than it is chocolatey. The inside of a proton is made of quarks, and they have colours and flavours.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
I really like the idea of the conversational, the providing the conversational bit, and I think I'd almost go further in my sort of my wish for my children is I like the idea that they would feel confident, or my son particularly, when I think about him, that he would feel confident asking questions in any situation and not feeling silly, or able to ask questions in an interested way in any situation. Then that I know that he could, turn up at the F1 and have a conversation where he is interested in what that person is doing and why, even if he wasn't interested in that sport specifically, or find a way to be interested in it, because the topics that are chosen, or the way that it sets out, I felt went across subject domains, if that makes sense, and I really liked that as an approach. Geography was my background, and I really regret in a time when I had to choose a humanities, and I had to choose between history and geography at school, as if they were competing. And actually, some of the really interesting things, and you do get into the book, is where those 2 areas overlap a little bit, and things start making sense. And I guess that comes into a question of you have put in these series of lessons in addition to the national curriculum. Is that because there is something wrong with how we are doing it at the moment, or is it there's a gap there that needs filling? Or
so I think that part of the joy of that conversation is that you bring something that I don't know and I bring something that you don't know. The curiosity conversation requires that we have some common ground, but it also requires that we have some areas that are not common. And I think that the drawback of the shared curriculum is not that there's anything wrong with it, it's that it is entirely shared. That the books that students read, the history that they learn, the maths that they learn, it's the same. And that's true across a wide range of subjects up to GCSE. At A-level or in sixth form, people do specialise, so they are going to be able to trade, but within the subject, there's less variation. And so what I want is that the students who've been on the course, or actually all students everywhere, are able to go into a conversation and say, actually, I know a surprisingly large amount about the size of countries in Africa. Mr. Handscombe, thank you very much for that list. That's not leaving my head anytime soon. And so the person they're talking to doesn't know that. And the person they're talking to might know a huge amount about Shakespeare. And that might be intimidating to somebody who wasn't used to being curious about other people's passions, but also who didn't have something to offer. Yeah, I mean, it's very exciting that Romeo and Juliet has 6 deaths in it. I can only name 3 of them off the top of my head. But actually, did you know that Ethiopia was the 10th largest country in Africa?
One of the parts that I think I really took away, and I was really intrigued by, I guess, was how it would work with. You've obviously been through and curated your cabinet of curiosity. You've been through and you've chosen topics carefully and in a considered way to elicit something, I guess, to draw out something from the students. And when you were doing that, when you currently are doing that, and you're thinking about the next lesson that you're going to teach, are you drawn to the topic first? Are you drawn to the kind of thinking that you might be able to get the students to do? How does that process work for you, and where do you place the value on each of those things?
So when I'm delivering my sessions, I will start the course with the maths one, and then I will choose probably the next 2 to be the ones that I think will cause the students to get most engaged and ask the most questions. And it depends on what the students seem to be interested in. And it depends on the kind of group that I've got. And I've delivered this to a range of different kinds of group, as well as actual students, selected in different ways, and across 2 different schools. Today, I got to sort of the middle section of my course. It's an 8-week course across the term, so about in the middle. And today I said to the class, I've got 3 choices for you. I can do a session on Greek myths. I can do a session on art appreciation. If I do Greek myths, it's going to be a very basic introduction. If I do art, it's not going to be terribly complicated. Or I can do subatomic physics, which is going to be very exciting. You should definitely vote for that one. And they all voted for Greek myths. And next week, I will say, okay, we've done Greek myths. So we're down to art or physics. And actually, the people who didn't get their wish last time have got a bigger vote this time. So it's likely to go physics next week. And what I'm leading up to is the end game of the Cabinet of Curiosity is that I don't arrive and fling open my cabinet and pull something out and say, this is what we're doing. I sit down in front of the group and say, what should we talk about today? And they bring their own curiosities, their own interests, their own questions, and we have a conversation across the room. And that's where I'm going, and that's kind of amazing when the class is ready for that, when they're used to each other, they're used to me, they're used to asking questions, they're used to knowing things and not knowing things, and they're going, okay, well, actually, I do. I want to talk about this today.
So when it comes to that point, and they are choosing for themselves, or even, I guess, as they go through the series of lessons, do you notice the young people there in front of you maybe showing an interest or a glimpse into something that you maybe didn't stereotypically think of them as being interested in? I think, if I was to try that flat off, I might end up with a bunch of young boys wanting to talk about their football teams, for example. But I guess I would hope that someone would stretch out, or I would see something. Are you surprised by some of the things that they're interested in, or how passionate they get about them?
Very often. Very often. And last year I had a group, and there was a student in the group who was just really hard work. And I don't know what was going on with his sleep patterns, but he seemed to think that my lesson was the time to catch up with a vital 20 minutes. And going, come on, wake up, pay attention, write something down, do some homework occasionally. All of these things, and he just wasn't. And I went through a phase with this group of saying, well, what are you reading? What book have you got with you? You meant to have a book today. School rules, there's a reading session today. You meant to have a book. Get your book out. Tell me what it is. What are you reading? And with some of the students in the class, it was pulling teeth and go, yeah, I've got my textbook. But that doesn't count. That's not a reading book. Do better than that. Bring something to read. I'd go to this guy and say, what have you got to read? And he'd have a fat fantasy book. And I a little bit suspicious. So I said, what page are you on? Because normally the answer is, well, I'm just about to start page 1. Yeah, I'm on page 213. You go, okay, so tell me the plot. And he said, okay, so what you need to know about this world is, and 5 minutes later, he's still talking, sharing his passion about this fantasy world. And that was incredible. And seeing, partly seeing what their interests, existing interests are, and partly seeing them become more interested in each other's interests as time goes on. That listening to each other and saying, okay, how did you get into this world? And is there magic? Are there dragons? I don't want to read a book about dragons. Or I do want to read a book about it.
Right? I think there is that possibly, and I wonder about this as I was reading through, I wonder if there are people, I believe myself, I saw the cover, I felt an affinity to it. I started reading. I was like, okay, like I have always been interested in many, many things. In fact, my parents very much complained that I had too many hobbies and never stuck at any. And I see that in my children as well, in the amount of even football teams at the moment. I've bought too many shirts because he just flits between them and learns everything he can about one football team. Then he's on to the next one. So you can't do that with football teams. You stick to one football team. And I feel that possibly there are some people who take to curiosity easier. And there are some people, for whatever reason, who maybe don't take to it as easy, maybe like the person you described. But do you see, when you're talking to these young people, is curiosity fixed? Is it something that can grow? Where do you see that in the young people?
Absolutely something that can grow. And I don't think I've had any students who've gone through the course and have not been more interested in things at the end. And I comment on that a bit, that at the end of the course, they have to write me a piece of work as sort of homework. And part of that is a reflection on their experience of being in the cabinet. And several students who have been really hard to get anything out of during the sessions will write in this thing, and unprovoked. I mean, they have to write something, right? So they're forced to write, but not forced to write this. They say, I realize I haven't engaged with this as well as I could have done, as well as I should have done. I really got out of the course once I started putting something into it. And if I have this opportunity again, I will definitely engage earlier and quicker and more wholeheartedly. So I think everyone can become more curious. I think part of it is feeling that you're given permission to be curious. I think that, I mean, if we were talking in the Victorian era, we wouldn't have an online conversation. But if we were talking in the Victorian era, we'd be saying children should be seen and not heard. That idea of questioning is not something that has always been welcomed in young people. And I think that now it's still not always welcomed in young people. We talked about those lessons where you are just one chapter ahead of the class and you're going, don't ask me that because I don't know the answer. And unless you're really confident, and this is why I put maths first, so I have this confidence, unless you're really confident, it's difficult to acknowledge as a teacher, actually, I don't know. And actually, you probably know more about Hesiod than I do. And so we close it down, because one of the great things about being a teacher is you are on the stage and you can decide what happens in a conversation in the classroom. You can open things up, you can shut things down. And we play safe when we get scared. And so I think one of the things students will pick up from that is don't ask too many questions. And the thing that I think is a blight on teaching, and there isn't very much blight on teaching because it's amazing, but one of the things I think is a blight on teaching is the answer, you don't need to know that. The idea that there are things that you don't need to know. And I catch myself saying it sometimes. You're teaching them some maths and they'll ask a question and you go, you don't need to know that. You go, well, of course you do need to know that. Or is it you don't need to know anything, right? I mean, you can get through life without any of this further maths nonsense. But you want to know it. You want to know what's over that hill. And maybe it's not immediately important and maybe it never will come up. But of course you want to ask the question, and you should ask the question, and you should expect an answer. And perhaps I can't afford the class time, but come and see me at the end of the day and we'll have this conversation. And I think that giving young people permission to ask the questions, to be curious, is a big step for some of them. And creating this classroom in which that is encouraged and expected is one of the joys of the cabinet.
There's two parts there that I wanted to pick up on, and one, I guess, is from the student point of view, and one I wrote down sort of as you started to talk, is from the teacher's point of view, and this it reminded me of that permission to divert from the topic that a teacher might not feel. And I've been there myself. Maybe not. You don't need to know this. Maybe more looking at my watch and thinking, I've only got 3 more lessons and I need to get through this. And that is a really interesting topic. That is a really interesting thing. And I would love to tell you about it, but I've got to cover this other stuff. And that permission to divert, I find really interesting. And I want to ask more about sort of what it requires of a teacher. But before that, I wanted to talk about, you do mention in the start of the book as well, I think in the introduction, about this expecting an answer. I can't remember. I think it's from an essay from someone else that maybe in Claire Fox, that's it, an essay from Claire Fox, and this idea of expecting an answer, which I really struck me as something I'd never thought about before, of students being in a place where they expect there to be an answer, or they need there to be an answer. And I wondered if you could expand on that slightly.
Yeah, I think the world kind of makes sense. I think that physics kind of works, maths kind of works, but not only that, psychology kind of works, right? That if somebody behaves in a certain way, it's probably because of something. They had something in their head. They made a decision, most people, most of the time. And so why is the world like it is? Why are these people behaving in the way they do? Why are these objects behaving in the way that they do? Why are these numbers behaving in the way that they do? Are all questions that there is probably an answer to. And it might be an answer that we don't have time for today. It might be an answer that I don't know the answer to. It might be, yeah, that's pretty tricky. If you do maths as a undergraduate, then they'll teach you that in your second year. Make a note of it and make sure you ask when you get there. But I'm not going to be able to explain that because it's just too much. And it might be, actually, nobody really knows the answer to that question yet. And I mean, there's original research to be done, and you probably need to be a PhD student before you're going to get. But write down the question, and when you've got your undergraduate degree and your master's, then tell your supervisor and see if you can answer the question. And there isn't very much that the answer is, oh, it just is. And I think that it is easy to be satisfied with that's just how they are. That's just how things are. And I don't think we should ever be. I think that just means the person you've asked doesn't know the answer. And I hope that I am upfront about saying, yeah, I don't know the answer to that one. It's an interesting question. Somebody probably does. We could probably ask somebody else, but I don't know the answer, because that's the honest response, isn't it?
And that does kind of take us on to that because you do talk again in the book about a kind of honesty of being corrected, and you've talked earlier on about being honest that the students might know more. But I wanted to ask you, obviously you're in the privileged position at the moment where you do have the time to have this on your timetable, and you talk about cover lessons as well. But if to deliver the Cabinet of Curiosity, what does it require of a teacher? Is it something any teacher could do, or is there a specific skill set, a specific approach? So I guess I'm asking you, what would you be looking for in your replacement? Did you need to hand the cabinet on to someone else?
So I think that potentially anybody could do this. I think that you have to be interested in stuff. So I think you have to be convinced by James's argument that curiosity is a superpower, and that you should get some more of that, and that you want to share some of that amazing curiosity goodness with the students. See, you have to buy into the game, otherwise it's not going to work. If I just put it on somebody's timetable and say, do this, that's going to be a bit tricky. But I think that beyond that, I think any teacher can do it. I mean, I think that one of the amazing things in putting it together has been how much I've learned. So I didn't really understand why atoms hold together before I put my session together. There's a session on the American Constitution, and I thought I knew something about the American Constitution because I lived in America for 2 years. But no, I knew almost nothing about the American Constitution. Now I know a small amount. I know 40 minutes worth that I'm happy to share with you. But there are going to be some questions that I don't know the answers to. And I think that you can start off with, so there are 8 sessions in a really tightly planned cabinet. You've got 8 weeks, you have 8 sessions, you learn 8 things, and you start off with the thing that you know really well. whatever your subject is. You got a topic there that is not quite on the A-level syllabus, or was on a few years ago but isn't anymore. I can do something now, something I'm comfortable with. And then there's going to be a bunch of things that are not in your subject where you do know something about them. So one of my sessions is British politics, 1979 to 1997. And that range of time goes from the first election that I remember. I was 4 and I went to vote with my mum, to the first election I could vote in. And I was 23 and really annoyed that I wasn't allowed to vote in the one before, which I missed by a fortnight. And so there is that session is politics, which is not my thing, but told through my experience. In the book I call it the value of idiosyncrasy. That I lived this, and I can tell you what it was like from a 7-year-old boy or 15-year-old boy's eyes, and that's a thing. That's okay. I can tell you that, and you'll ask me some questions, and I won't know the answer because I was 15 or 7 or 4. And then in order to make you up to 8, you probably do need to learn some stuff for a couple of sessions. And so you need to know in advance you're going to do this, and you need to give yourself some time. And this was the point when I first did it, that I was kind of regretting having agreed to do it. So I floated it with some colleagues, and they said, that's an excellent idea. You should definitely do that. And when we say you should definitely do that, we mean you should definitely do that, and we should just watch for the minute. But it was an amazing process of learning it. And I was making all of this up from nothing. And I'm hoping that with the aid of the book, somebody else will be able to go, no, actually, I could do that. And I wouldn't do subatomic physics. But that thing about black holes, that one, I think I probably could deliver.
I think it's worth shining a light on, because you've mentioned it there, is that there's this beautiful kind of mixture of, like, people will hear you talking and the passion and enthusiasm, but this is more than, Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society throwing books out of the window. That you talk about the amount of planning that's going there, that it feels, when you describe it in the book, in the same way tight as it is free. And I think that's a really interesting thing to have in education at the moment, for it to not be one thing or the other. It isn't sort of completely free and, creative and that end of it, but also it's not formulaic and factual as well. It seems to sit in a very unique place in the middle for me, that I really liked and really spoke to me as teaching, as maybe I understood it. And maybe that's where the passion comes from. And I'm sure the listeners will hear that passion and hopefully reflect on it as well. That this feels like how I understand teaching to be, which is maybe turning on light bulbs, maybe starting a fire, whatever metaphor you want to use within it, of encouraging more learning to take place. And I like that idea. And I wanted to ask you about, after the course had finished, whether students come back to you still, whether you hear afterwards, whether how you see that continuing once they've done their 8 sessions.
So I think that one of the things that I've taken advantage of and definitely use is the fact that I don't really assess. So the assessment for this course is of that piece of work that they do at the end. So at the end, they have a couple of hours, some of which is class time, some of which is homework time, and I say, respond, do whatever you like. And yeah, I can give you an idea. I can tell you what one thing that would be acceptable would be, but really, I want you to respond. You've been in the cabinet for 8 weeks. You've seen me ranting and waving my hands and getting excited about all kinds of different things. What have you got excited about? What has been interesting? And so I get that, and that is really interesting, and some do it better than others. But what there isn't is a performance measure. There isn't something where I can say, yes, my class as a result of having been in the cabinet are now 2 more curious than they were before. And so we have this testing that goes on 6 months later of curiosity. That doesn't exist. That's not really the thing. And I think that is the challenge that education has, is that we need to have qualifications. We need to have certificates that students can take with them to show that they have learned some things. And those are really important. Transferable measures of learning are vital for social mobility. We can't get rid of them. They are in some ways incredible themselves. But the danger is that when we think that is the purpose of education. It's not the purpose. It's a way of using it and making it work for us. But the purpose of education is that students get excited and learn things. I have them coming up to me. I'm fairly available as a head in the school, and they will come and they will talk to me, and they'll say, yeah, I remember you said whatever it was about whatever it was. And then they'll write their UCAS personal statements, and they'll say, oh, Mr. Handscombe's Cabinet of Curiosity, I learnt this. And you'll go, okay, excellent. But even better, I think, is when you read their UCAS statement and there is just something that they've read or been to that wasn't part of the Cabinet of Curiosity, and you're going, you've got it. You have something that I didn't teach you, that you've gone and been interested and been excited and found out. And it wasn't that I told you, it was because you were curious. And you do see that, and it's amazing.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of BetUK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, BetUK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
Now, I wanted to pitch to you, and the book is out on Friday, Cabinet of Curiosity. It's from Hachette Learning. I wanted to pitch, obviously it won't make it into this edition, maybe, something, because I couldn't help but reading through thinking, and I know you've mentioned this before about the teacher maybe having to bring their own passion, their own interest. So I've got a couple of things to pitch to you as possibilities that might work in a Cabinet of Curiosity. Now, one of them, and this is my personal favorite, and I probably could talk for hours on this, would be toponyms, so place names, and particularly what they tell us about it. So I'm thinking there's geography here, I think there's history here. I want to call it something around Torpenhow Hill. Yeah. Okay. Have you heard of Torpenhow Hill?
Yeah. Hill.
So I love that. That's something that I drop into almost every chance that I get. But I think there's something interesting there that we can unpick. I think there's maybe some local knowledge. Certainly, people might know Swansea, where I am, is not after swans or the sea. It's after Swain's eye, and he was a Viking, and that's how we know the Vikings were here. So as an initial pitch, do you think I've got something there that could work in a lesson for me, in a Cabinet of Curiosity style lesson?
I think that would be amazing. And being in Swansea, you've also got Abertawe. So you've not just got the English Swain's eye, you've got the Welsh mouth of the Towie. And
do you know what that brings me on to as well? And this, we talk about people being interested, but we're doing I can't help now. But I grew up in Cambridge, okay, and Cambridge in Welsh is called Casgrant, and the Cass is castle, and the Grant is Granter, which is the river, and Cambridge should be called Granter Bridge. And it changed at some point in the Saxon period. The Granter part changed, and it became Cambridge. And they had to rename the river as it flows through Cambridge to be called the River Cam. North of Cambridge and south of Cambridge is still called the Granter.
Yeah,
because the bridge didn't make sense.
There, right?
Grantchester is Chester the castle, and Granter the thing.
Exactly the same word, right?
So the Welsh name for Cambridge is more accurate than the English name for Cambridge. And again, sorry, I get sidetracked, but that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. Something like that we maybe the class can bring their own words.
Yeah, and I think you've got something really powerful there in terms of locality. So the community that you are speaking to, and you're in Wales, which is, well, when I was in Swansea, quite a tight community. So what have we got, and what have we got to be proud of? Was a big question. And so these names, and you've got the bilingualism. So all of the places have got an English name and a Welsh name. What are they both bringing to understand the place? And then I think you've got looking outwards. Where else are there two names of places? Because one of the challenges I found in South Wales was not only getting them to have a sense of their own place, but getting them to look beyond their own place and realise that the world was bigger than the Rhondda Valley, and there are so many opportunities there. So Mumbai and Bombay, that's the same word but pronounced differently. But Chennai and Madras, those are two different words, and so there are a variety of different places, some of which the location is bilingual, and there are two words for the same name. I'm guessing that Belgium would work for us here, but I can't come up with examples off the top of my head. And some of which are bringing you into a colonial issue of two different nations, a local one and a foreign one, each having their own name for a place. And I think that's fascinating. And that question of what should we call a place? You said more accurate to call it Castle. What should we call a place? That is when the students are going to have views. That's when they're going to say, can we have that discussion? I've got something to say here.
So I as I say, I read the book. I am excited by the concept. The two parts I liked about it were this maybe unmeasurable thing that enriches their lives and hopefully goes on to enrich their lives, which I liked about it and spoke to me. But also I felt that reading it, and I feel that talking to you now, and possibly people will have seen as soon as I start talking about place names or geography, or I start maybe getting a bit more excited. But maybe I feel that it would be an approach that, I'm maybe 20 years on now in the teaching game, and maybe it brings me back to being a younger teacher. I don't want to say a more passionate teacher, but seeing the thing that I wanted to do, it spoke to me a lot, this book. So thank you for putting it together. I really did enjoy it, and I can't speak highly enough. And it is out on Friday, I should say. There it is again. A lovely cover. Now, we've spoke a little bit there about what I've started thinking maybe I might poach, I might steal. There are things here. There are things that I will avoid. I'm going to say, there are topics that I think are beyond me there. I will replace those ones. But if there was someone listening who, is pre-ordering this book as we speak, and, is looking to read it over the weekend, where would you tell them to start in their journey to thinking about implementing something like this for themselves?
I think that you need to find the space for the students to be in the same room as you. I think that's the big challenge. And I'm in the fortunate position of being able to decide where the students go in my school. And so we had this session set up for our sixth formers, where every week they go into a class and are taught something that isn't on a syllabus. So there was already this isn't on your syllabus space that the Cabinet of Curiosity slotted into. And if there are any heads listening, I would very much recommend it as a thing to do with your sixth formers. I think it's top notch. So you have to find where you're going to do it. I am working with a few schools at the moment, and I'm on the verge of saying, you know what, we should do a Cabinet of Curiosity, but after school. We should get them to stay back and do it, because that would be so much fun. And if you could get 6 of them to come, you really would have a lot of fun. And it would change their lives and develop curiosity and give them superpowers, which would be a thing to do. I think once you've got your potential space, you need to sketch out what your 8 sessions are. And the 8 sessions format works really nicely. So you have these 8 sessions that you're ready to deliver. And if some of them evaporate because you have the discussion session instead, that's brilliant. But at least it's easy. It's easy to deliver the session. The discussions are harder. It was 2 or 3 times through before I dared do a discussion session. So you have your 8 sessions, and then after that, you give them 2 sessions to do their response. And I think that the personal response is really important. I think that is where they have to think about what's happened to them. They have to think about what curiosity does for them. And so you've got your 8 sessions. As I say, I think one will be dead easy because that'll be your favorite thing. And then you'll find 3 or 4 more that come together from a variety of things where you need to do a bit of reading and check on some details, but basically you're feeling okay about it. And then you need to go and talk to your colleagues and say, yeah, I'm feeling that it's pretty geography heavy at the moment. I need some history. What is an interesting thing in history? And if you are thinking what's an interesting thing in history, there's a little bit in the book on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And I really recommend that one as something that the students hadn't come across. And when it's one of my cover lessons, so I just give them a sheet of paper with it's a doctored Wikipedia article, in fact, and some questions. And then the next session, I'll start with a discussion. And they'll be saying, why don't we get taught this in school? Okay, what do you think just happened? Where do you think we are? What's going on here? I did just teach you it in school. But that leaves them going, yeah, man, I should know this stuff. And maybe it's economics, well, whatever it is, go and talk to your colleagues who are not in your natural area and say, I want to do 40 minutes on something that they won't know, that I can get my head round. Do you have a book? Do you have something I can look up, something I can follow? There's a lot of popular science, popular history, popular mathematics books out there. Some of them are in my bibliography. Read what Alice Roberts has to say. Read what Alex Bellos has to say. Read what Simon Singh has to say. Read what Simon Sharma has to say.
Well, I'm afraid, I'm sorry that we find ourselves coming to the end of our time, because I'm really curious about the curiosity, as it turns out, which is what the book has done. I want to obviously thank you, James, who has come. And James's book, The Cabinet of Curiosity, Developing a Superpower, is out on Friday. It's from Hachette Learning. And you should be able to find it there. If you want any better sign, have a look at my post-it notes there. That, it was page after page where there was something that I wanted to pick out. And I should say, it is worth reading, even if you are not currently going to be implementing something like this, because there is so much to pick out just from the point of view of something that maybe is missing sometimes from our lessons of, giving yourself permission to be curious. And as I say, I really like this idea of students, expecting that there are going to be answers to things, or expecting that they can find answers to things. So thank you so much for coming along tonight, James.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure. And we'll say, Nostar and Diolch yn fawr as well, seeing as I know that you've spent some time down here in South Wales. And we will say good night for now. And don't forget to catch us on Teachers Talk Radio. And if you have just come in at the end of the stream, it will be available as a podcast and on our YouTube channel and everywhere else on our socials. If you wanted to catch the beginning and hear some of this amazing conversation about curiosity as a superpower. So thank you and good night.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.